kept in the loop quite a bit by your local media, the newspaper and Raven Radio. And the newspaper, they've been giving it to us at no cost, which I'm sure is costing them quite a bit. And then the other question mark is all those youngsters that used to sell the newspapers, they've lost their income. Maybe if we could subsidize the newspaper office or business, they could get something to all those youngsters that used to have an income. And I know there are people that have taken the route that the income was important to them. So we've been able to keep track of everything because the local media has given us all the directions that Sarah and company have put together so we can know that you're meeting on Thursday night for a special agenda item. I would also put a plug in for Raven Radio. We can listen to them all the time, and they're not able to get funds from us because we don't have the funds to give out of our pocket to donate. So those two items. And lastly, I would ask that we recoup that $100,000 that there was allocated for a librarian because we don't have a library anymore. Excuse me. It's upsetting that they've chosen to keep it closed because there are a lot of my clients that utilize the library for access to the DVDs and CDs and stuff like that. And then there are people that use it for access to the internet that haven't been able to get their Trump bump or their unemployment because they can't get on the internet because they can't get to a computer. So I would ask that you open up the library or get our $100,000 back because since this happened, it closed. So on that, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you, Mr. George. Mr. Paul? Yep. Comments from the public? Okay, we're back to the Assembly for a discussion, direction, decision on establishment and membership of the CARES Act Working Group. Mr. Leach?
Thank you, Mayor and Assembly, for coming here tonight to discuss this. I'll just briefly summarize my memo and the reason for being here tonight. So on the May 19th Assembly work session, we talked about CARES Act funding and how to move forward, and there was some discussion about a working group that could develop a framework or a budgetary framework and ways we could allocate money, ways people could apply to get grants or loans or whatever the case may be, any sort of assistance. So I started basically the formulation of a working group. I did the best I could to try to develop a working group that presented I would say, zero conflict of interest for anybody that could be receiving funds themselves. And as part of that work group, we included the chair of an economic resiliency task force that we created here. Since that task force speaks for all sectors of our community, and I have the membership of that as the last page of your Assembly packet, so you can see who's represented on that task force. So that working group was myself, the tribe, the Economic Resiliency Task Force chair, 2 Assembly members, our finance director, our controller, who herself has worked in the nonprofit industry and finance in her past career, and our legal office and the assistant clerk. Unfortunately, since then there were some sectors that did not feel that they were adequately represented in that working group. So I felt it best to bring that working group makeup to the table here for your consideration and modification if necessary, and we will proceed, or the decisions for funding, design, and distribution could be left completely with the assembly. So those are just the options I throw out for consideration.
Right? Assembly members? Yeah. Tor?
I would argue that that John has put together a pretty good group. And actually, and if we decide to take it back to the assembly, that'd be okay too. But I think his group is more, it's probably more of a technocratic group, more of a butt nuts and bolts kind of thing, rather than determining where, the assembly is gonna be the ones that determine where it actually goes. It's more just framework and things. So I have no problem with John's group. But if the will of the rest of the assembly is to take it over ourselves, I don't have much problem with that. I don't really have a problem with that either.
Yeah, Valerie?
I would liken this to what the employee committee did when we had it, and I would prefer to see 3 assembly members, just in case one can't be there. I think that would be a better way to do it, but I kind of like your reasoning and how you've structured it thus far. But my suggestion would be to have 1 more assembly member, and I'm not volunteering.
Other comments from the assembly? Yeah, Kevin?
I just want to say, I think this, I kind of mirror Tor's, I like this working group. I'm obviously in it. I don't need to be in it. I'd like to be in it. And I think this, you pinned it. This is more of like just nuts and bolts, getting onto some working ideas to bring to the greater assembly that's going to have to decide on this. So I would vote on this. I would approve this as is, or even with 1 more assembly member. And if it's not the will of the assembly to have one at all, that's fine too. I think this would be a little more efficient, but I'm okay either way.
Yeah, Dr. Weed.
A couple of things. The assembly passed at its last meeting a resolution to accept the funds, and that is something that we are required to do. It is through the assembly, which is the governing body, needs to accept the funds and also needs to delegate in some way how these funds are spent, which brings up the point that at the end of the day, if there are any issues or problems, it is the assembly, or rather, the city, that will be responsible for any decisions. I believe in a strong assembly. I think this is not like I apologize, it's not like a hiring committee, but we are dispersing $14 million to various elements of the city. One thing I do not like to do is to refashion things, or in essence, to do things twice. And so far, members have said, well, it will come back to the assembly. But that has the potential also to be something where there might be changes and refiguring. So my notion is that since it is the assembly's responsibility, ultimately, that we act as assembly, as a body, act as the group who will make those decisions, and to allow testimony in a very liberal and thoughtful way to hear various people from the community and or their representatives. Keep the good ideas, don't accept the ones that don't make sense, and we will fashion it one time only at this table. I think the assembly is the elected body. They need to work towards this. I know I myself will meet as often as necessary, and I don't think it'll be that often if we approach this in a very working-like manner. So my notion is the assembly as the whole will deal with things, and we will take lots of testimony in order to make the determination. At the end of the day, I think that is the best road which will eliminate any contention or other issues. And the reason I say that is if the assembly is doing it and we take testimony from the community, everybody has access. And that is what I think the assembly is about, access and allowing everyone to participate in the process. Thank you.
Yes, Stephen? You're welcome to. Please. Wait after you.
So I actually have spent a lot of time thinking about this one because this was it was kind of an interesting issue. I did like the group that our administrator came up with. I thought it was a pretty well represented group, but others didn't feel that they were represented quite as much. And so really what I came down to for this evening, and it doesn't even sound like we're kind of headed down this direction, but what I came down to, the question for me that needed to be answered was if we're going to allow one group to have a representative on this, on the working group, are we going to allow all groups to have representation? Because I can't sit here and say that one group has a specialized voice while others are left out. And I feel that at that point we would end up with such a large group that perhaps nothing ends up getting done. I do like the layout or the organization of this group. I feel that it is fairly diverse without being conflicted and wouldn't conflict itself out. And I also realize that it's only recommendations that come from this group. The doctor's suggestion that the assembly is the ultimate body on this is true. We are the ultimate body on this. But we also have boards, committees, and commissions that send recommendations up to us. I don't personally have the time to meet every day to work through this, and I'm also looking for ideas that are outside of my box. And a working group can present ideas to me that are going to be outside of my box. So I'm in support of having a working group, and I'm actually in support of the working group that our administrator has laid out.
Let me go first. Can I, Tor? Yeah. Yeah, I think this is exactly what we should be doing. And the question of assembly oversight, I probably am a little bit different than Dr. Wayne. I think this group needs to be empowered to do what they got to do. But I also believe there should be assembly oversight. And how that occurs, I think we'll do that as we go along, as we start getting a strategic budget put in place. We should all hear about that and give our thing. But I don't see the assembly being in the act of approving each individual request for funds, whether it's an individual or a grant from a business. So that's where I am on this thing. Kevin Knox, sir, do you have any comments before we proceed?
Yeah, so I guess the comment that I would make, and you know, I brought the concern forward about one particular group that I didn't feel like, or they didn't feel like, was being fully represented there, and it's a rather large, as we all know, the nonprofit industry within Sitka is large, but it also serves a pretty critical niche in the service delivery within our community, and we're not just talking about the nonprofits that serve, like Fine Arts Camp or the Science Center or other things like that. We're talking about the full breadth of the nonprofits within this community that do social services and other things like that, our social safety nets within our community. So the thought was that the group had a representative that was very versed and in tune with the for-profit sector, and Gary White being on the working group, but then also having one other person to kind of bring a little bit of voice or different voice from the nonprofit sector might be helpful within all of this. And it's not something that, and I think that I really hope it doesn't end up changing the face of a really well put together. In the end, John did put together a great list here of people to come up with this framework in the document that will end up coming before the body, to decide ultimately how it moves forward or not. But I personally thought, and then other people within the community were thinking that having that nonprofit voice there would lend to the discussion.
Balance is, and all my nonprofit friends could hold me guilty on this, but listen, if you get nonprofits in there, then you got to get fishing people in, and the group will just get too large and out of control. They have a voice in the economic resiliency things. One of the reasons, Kevin, you're on there is because we know you're concerned with and involvement in nonprofits. I think our attorneys involved in nonprofits. I mean, we all are involved and see the value of nonprofits. I know that Roger Smith is meeting with our attorney, with our administrator tomorrow. I'm a big fan of Roger Smith and Lisa Bush, and I think that their concerns will be well represented, so forth. That's just my view. Yeah, Tor?
I'm a little bit, I was thinking about Dr. Wayne's suggestion, and I was thinking about how that would work. And whether or not that would be faster or slower than what we're doing now. And I guess because we would almost have to come up with some guidelines and then throw it back to the attorney to write the ordinance and then have it come back because we've got to do ordinance to spend money, or we have an overarching one. I was trying to think of a way we could make that work. There'd probably be ways, but I think the two are not mutually exclusive. I mean, this grant group could give us some framework, and then the assembly can basically invite everybody in and say, okay, here's what we're thinking. What do you think of that? Here are some ideas. I mean, I'm just kind of almost doodling here, thinking that if we set up and say, okay, set aside X number of dollars for direct grants to organizations, be they businesses, nonprofits, whatever, and some for a certain amount for direct action, like doing work on the city buildings that's COVID related, and another one for possibly for school type stuff, the things that affect how COVID's affected the school district. And then work within those frameworks, and that's exactly the kind of thing that I expect to come out of this group. But regardless, we're going to have to spend a lot of time on it as an assembly. There's no way around that. And I think the nonprofits will be represented in those grants probably a fair amount. But I'm afraid that we don't want advocacy coming into the working group. It's more just trying to figure out a framework, and that's when the advocacy will start. Although I'm hoping that we have some sort of a grant program that essentially doesn't make any differentiation between a small business and a nonprofit. And they both would get, like I said, we're not going to make anybody whole, but we can make it less hurtful.
Yeah, Mr. Leach?
So I have no preference of either outcome. The way I see this and the way I approach it is this is more or less a hasty budget formulation. Just like we do for the annual budget. We're just trying to figure out how to spend this $14 million, what the correct amounts are, what the correct sectors are, and then just start to develop some rules and some guidelines on how you access each one of those. So if it's this assembly table that helps determine those guidelines and the budgets, that's fine. The intent was to have a working group do that for you, just like our finance staff puts that together with our annual budget, bring it forward in as few ordinances as possible, so then we can go operate in it. So again, if it's the working group or the table, I think both can work. It's just a matter of which one makes it happen faster.
There's no way around it. It's going to be both.
Yeah.
Of course it's going to be both. I mean, but to have that group do it. Okay, yeah, Dr. Wayne.
I thought there was a question in there from Tor, and I'll peel it away. But first I'll answer a concern of Mayor Paxton, and that was, he said, quote, approving each individual act. I hope that he didn't think that my suggestion would be that the assembly members would be signing every check.
No,
That's not the purpose. It is to establish the framework, as in essence the working group would do. in answer to Tor, you're worried about whether it would be slower or faster. Well, I think it would be more complete, because whatever we would finish would be it. And that would be, in essence, the end of the conversation. And what would happen is we would be hearing the arguments in real time. And one of the benefits of this is that I feel if we bring the community in to give testimony, I think it helps us better understand how the community is working. And I think it brings us closer to them in this process. And I feel that the Assembly can do it. It's just a question of will. Thank you.
Do we have a motion to approve the working group recommended?
Yeah,
by-
I was just gonna say, let's have someone make a motion and then we
I'll
can.
make a motion to approve the recommended working group membership and tasking per enclosure 1. If necessary, amending the working group membership is also possible. No, just approve the recommended working group as proposed by the administrator.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Assembly members. For the record, my name is George Paul. Thank you for the motion. Reading the working group and looking at that in the article and listening, I apologize for the people I'm about to offend. I think keep reverting back to that night on New Year's Eve where the people I was talking to about the city finances and the city government. You have people that are making $100,000 a year talking to people that are making $100,000 a year, and those that live paycheck to paycheck aren't going to be heard. That's kind of what the working group looks like. I'm actually surprised that there aren't a lot of, the room isn't full with the nonprofits that brought the issues up. I thought I was going to have to be in the waiting line to get to the microphone tonight. I think that Dr. Ween's suggestion is probably the best personal opinion, my personal opinion. I think it's probably the best idea is to have the Assembly work as a committee of the whole, taking all the input from the different nonprofits and interests in the community, because after watching what happened on Ann Pollnow in that process, I can't imagine anybody wanting to be on any type of committee in the city of Sitka. So, but not having to go to a vetting process before you can give an opinion, I think it would be a good process. So I think Dr. Ween's original idea of having the Assembly work as a committee of a whole, take the suggestions and the requests from community members and nonprofits would be the best idea, my private opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Comments from the Assembly?
Just one real quick one. The one thing I like about the committee, and I suspect we're going to get it thrown back at us with more suggestions than actually have money for, but at least it can be vetted for things that are eligible for CARES Act funding. One of the things I've seen is a number of suggestions for things we should be using this money for that we can't, that we absolutely cannot. And so that's the one thing that and my kind of nightmare of having George was saying, the committee of the whole, is that we have a bunch of people coming up and saying, you should do this with the money, and us having to say, we can't, that's not legal. So that if we have the committee do it, we'll at least know that everything they come forward has been somewhat vetted by people who can say, okay, if you do this, you won't get in trouble.
Other comments from the Assembly? Dr. Ween.
Well, that's why we have an attorney and an administrator to help guide us through the process. As mentioned by Mr. Leach previously, the CARE Act funding issues are fluid and they will change. To me, government is an education. And this gives us an idea of government in process of working through real money issues as opposed to stepping away from it and delegating it. We really get into it. And the bonus here is we get to interact with the community, understand their needs. Whereas this in effect eliminates, except as persons to be heard per se, when the working group submits, that it just eliminates too much. And I would like to, I'll just say, the tent theory, everyone's welcome into the tent. Let's talk about it. Let's get the best possible idea, even if it takes a little bit of time. If you're looking at your watch when you're doing surgery, you should probably retire. So just take our time, do it right. Thank you.
Of course we will. Other yeah, Valerie.
I think that all those people that Mr. Paul is worried about not having a voice will get the voice. What this motion is to establish the working group as recommended by our administrator, and the tasking of the group is to develop a framework for us to operate within. We will have the final say, and if we choose to have meetings and hear every person that needs assistance, we can do that. But I think it's a good idea to have the working group to come up with the framework. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, yeah, please, Steve.
Sorry, I wasn't quick enough there.
No.
Mr. Leach, I think you got a lot of good suggestions that were spoken about tonight besides the formation of the working group. I heard a lot of different great ideas on how this working group should operate, and I saw you taking notes on that. So I do appreciate that, because this is the word framework has been thrown out many times. Suggestions, recommendations, they will come back with those to the assembly. I think they understand they're not the final say in it, but I hope you picked up on the kind of behind the scenes things that were happening as well, and not just the formation of the working group tonight.
Call for the vote.
Okay, the motion before you is to approve the recommended working group as proposed by the administrator. And before I call the roll, I'll just read through the members of the working group. So the group would consist of the municipal administrator, John Leach, Gary White. Gary is the SICA Economic Resiliency Task Force Chair. Lisa Gassman, SICA Tribe of Alaska Administrator. Kevin Mosier, Assembly Member and a member or participant of the SICA Economic Resiliency Task Force. Kevin Knox, Assembly Member, and Kevin's involved with local nonprofits. Jay Sweeney, the Finance Director. Melissa Haley, the Controller. And Brian Hansen, our Municipal Attorney. And then Melissa Henshaw, Deputy Clerk. Mayor Paxton?
Yes.
Mr. Christensen?
Yes.
Mr. Knox?
Yes.
Mr. Mosier?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbeis?
Yes.
Dr. Wien?
No.
Ms. Nelson?
Yes.
The motion passes 6-1.
All right. Persons to be
Oh,
heard.
sorry.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All say aye.
Aye.
All in favor say aye. Thank you.